Okay, let's take a look at the second part of this question. When should I use each and when should I use map, and what exactly is the difference? So to answer this, let's jump across to the Ruby documentation website and let's see what it says about those methods on array. So if we jump into array and see, we can see down the left hand side a list of all of the methods on array, and if we click on each, that tells us that each calls a block once for each element in self, self being the array we call it on, and passes that element as a parameter. So in this example, between our curly brackets, or our do end as I like to use, each element is going to get assigned to X, and then the code within the block will get executed. Now let's take a look at map and see what that does. So the map method invokes the block once for each element of self, exactly in the same way that .each does, but map also creates a new array containing the values returned by the block. So same as each, it loops through all of the values, but in this case whatever the block does gets added to a new array, and then once it's finished looping through all of the elements, that array will get returned by the map method. So let's see how that operates once we jump back to our example from earlier. So earlier we were creating our new empty array ourselves. If we switch over and use the map method rather than each, now we don't need to add the values that we're creating, our new integers. We don't need to add that to our temporary array ourselves. It will automatically be added to a new array by the map method itself. So we can get rid of our returned array 1. We just need to assign the new array that the map method is going to create. We just need to assign that to a variable. So let's assign that to a new variable called array of integers. Now we can remove our old empty array and replace it with our array of integers. I could have reused the same name, but just for clarity I'm creating a new variable. Now let's run that and see, does it still return us our array of integers and fix them as we expected? It does. So now let's add a new element to the array just to make sure everything's still working. Okay, so we've got 100 in there and it's picking that up correctly as well. So in answer to the question, when should I use each and when should I use map and what exactly is the difference? Well, you should use map when you need to loop through an array of something and have a new array returned as well. Because map will do that automatically for us, so we don't need to take care of that lower level detail ourselves. In contrast, we should use each when you need to loop through an array but not necessarily return a new array as well. So for example, let's say we needed to loop through an array and print out all of its values. In that case, we don't need a new array returned. We can just loop through it, print out our values, and that should be fine. Another example could be if we wanted to loop through all of the values in an array and pick out the highest one. So in that case, we're just looking for one value and we're trying to figure out which is the highest one. We don't want to return a whole new array. So in that case, we'd use .each. So let's take that example of finding the highest number in our array, and let's implement that using .each. So myArray.each do value. So let's create an empty variable called highest. We can just assign nil to that. So that's just going to be blank for now. And then inside our block, let's assign to the highest variable the value from the array unless highest is greater than the current value that we're looking at. So that should allow us to keep track of what's the highest, and then let's print out what the highest value is after it's finished executing that block. So let's try running that now. Okay, we get an error because we can't compare against nil. So let's just replace that with 0. Now we're getting another error because we can't compare string using greater than, so I've forgotten to convert it to an integer. Let's put in our call to toI to convert our value to an integer. Now that should work, so let's run it again. Okay, so now it's keeping track of the highest one and returning it. Let's add another element to our array that's a little bit lower than 100, just to make sure it's not just returning us the last number. Okay, so it's still returning us 100 even though we've put another number in there. So hopefully that answers what's the difference between each and map when using it on array.